Good afternoon, everybody. I'm PJ Norwood, my co-host Frank Ricci. We're here with the live Google Hangout for February 27th, live from the New Haven Union Fire Office in New Haven, Connecticut. Today we got a really good show. We have a whole bunch of guests here, all crowded into one place. And we're going to talk about something a little bit different. Talk about extraordinary incidents. The first incident we're going to discuss happened here in the city of New Haven. A mass casualty incident ended up to be a mass overdose incident, something that I know I've never experienced, and I don't believe the city of New Haven has ever experienced. But luckily, they were able to use their experience, their education that they put forth every day in the city to good use and an extremely successful outcome. Now we're going to talk about something that we do all the time, but we may not have a lot of information or knowledge on. That's responding to HVAC unit emergencies and the smells and bells calls, and tracking it down and trace it down to HVACs or the rooftop units. So today, to get this done, we have John McFarland, who's the lead supervisor here at American Medical Response in New Haven, Connecticut. We have Dr. David Cohn, who's the EMS section chief out of Yale Emergency Room. We have Adam Hansen, who's a lieutenant in Milford, Connecticut Fire Department. And just stepping in, we have Assistant Chief Mark Vendetto from the New Haven Fire Department. How are you? So you see, we have a great group, a lot of experience, and a lot of different experiences to talk about these two incidents today. And I'm going to turn it over to Frank Ricci and get this ball rolling.
Well, really, I'm going to let PJ moderate this because I wasn't at this alarm on the green with the mass overdoses. That day in the city, we had a reported jumper on one of our city cliffs. We had a building collapse and a commercial building fire all at the same time while the department was working with our partners, AMR, Yale, mitigating a mass casualty incident. So Chief Vendetto happened to just pop in, which is great because he was one of the incident commanders at some point in time during that. And so PJ, if we could have you kind of ask everybody what their role was, what the lessons were, I think that'd be very informative for our listeners.
That sounds great, Frank. I appreciate that. What we'll do, since Chief Vendetto's here, the initial 911 calls would have come in through the city of New Haven 911 center. So, Chief, tell us how this day started out and when we started to realize that this was more than just a single or a double overdose patient on the city green. If you go through the beginning of part of that, and then we'll go to AMR to talk about the EMS response, and then we'll kick to the doc here, and we could talk about EMS response, but also the hospital response and calling out the SHARP team, which we'll have Dr. Cohn explain what that is and how we benefit from that.
And Chief, before you start here, take this seat right here so that you're front and center. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that day started out like our ordinary days. We started with our morning meeting and we were getting rolling and we got listening to the calls, and I received a call from our communication center saying, Chief, we're up to our 4th overdose on the green. And right after I hung up the phone, 3 more came in from the engine companies on scene. I was like, all right, it's time for us to start going. So we showed up on the green, and when we initially showed up, the green's a large area. So you're thinking of an MCI where it's instant. It was kind of a rolling effect that day. So we didn't have 120 within a 1-hour window. We had 120 over a 24-hour period. So it's kind of that rolling MCI that kind of escalated from there. So we originally got on scene. We established a command post. We started getting organized with the incident command system. The SHARP team got on scene. That was one of the first things we did, was get control of the area and how many people we really had and where these calls were coming in, and starting to track the patients, because it did start hitting that little snowball effect. And as Frank was saying, we kind of got through that initial wave, and then it slowed down. And we're like, all right, calm down. We were starting to de-escalate. And then, like Frank said, we ended up getting a reported jumper off East Rock. And on my way to East Rock jumper, we had a reported structure collapse. So after we finished the jumper off East Rock, I went to the structural collapse. From that, I had a working fire in a commercial building. Came back to the green where the calls just kept rolling in over that day, and it kept escalating. So we started getting repeat offenders. So it wasn't just that initial, hey, I have 120 people on the green that dropped as MCI. We had to triage it. It was that slow lingering, which kind of made it a little different. It was a different approach because it turned into an MCI, but it was that it rolled onto us. It wasn't just all at once, just go out there, triage it, treat it, and you're done. Kind of just kept coming at us at a slow pace.
Yeah, Chief, those are some good things you talk about. Normal MCI, we think of a school bus accident or a plane crash or a train where you send those primary triage teams in, and your secondary triage, you start talking about your collection points and your transportation officers. But this, like the Chief was saying, this wasn't a 1-hour incident that started. This was a span of over 24 hours. So you know, the city of New Haven does not do transport EMS. You do first response, ALS, and BLS response. Right. So you had to really work with our partners, AMR, who's our private ambulance service in this area, who has a lot of resources to assist the surrounding community. So what were you looking for from AMR, and how did that work out?
Yeah, AMR came out. They were a great assistance. We had the Sharp team initially right off the bat. Dr. Cohn and Dr. Baguki, they were on scene with the Sharp team. We had the AMR supervisors on scene. And then once it kept rolling us, we actually used AMR's command bus and actually used them as the command post so it could free up a lot of our assets and still keep the city going. They were handling a lot of the transport right on the green and medical treatment. We had to hire back overtime. So it was one of those MCIs that we had time to deal with as far as turning around, and we hired back. We put crews on there. We set up the mobile command with AMR's mobile command unit, teaming up with our partners for that. And some of it with the triage tags, it started getting to a point where they were actually coming back out with the hospital wristbands on them, like kind of a triage for us to track them. But it did take a group effort. It did take a partnership with AMR, tracking patients. The initial problems that we had were quickly in the beginning of how many we had, where they went. Used AMR to help us with the tracking of the patients. Dr. Cohn and Dr. Baguki were on scene with the smart triage. So we got all that up and running quick. It really showed how the partnership, when you do have the MCI, you do need to be able to work with interagencies.
And we're lucky that, you know, the city of New Haven, the town of East Haven, and AMR, we work so well together because of our local airport, doing yearly tabletop exercises and triennial full-scale drills. I think really showed off, even though this wasn't a plane crash, right? Our partnerships and your partnerships really paid off that day. So John, let's talk about your role. I know you were the supervisor on duty that day. So, you know, like the chief explained, how did this roll out for AMR, and what type of resources were needed from AMR to help with this incident over the 24-hour period?
So for us, like the chief said, started out as a normal day. Excuse me. I was actually out at a Region 2 meeting out in Guilford. I had one of my supervisors that works for me, you know, was on duty. He gave me a text while I was out there. He said, "Hey, you'd be interested in this. We're up to our 9th overdose on the green. So it might be something, you know, you want to start heading back for." So it just so happened we had some extra supervisors on during the day because we had just hired. One of them was training with me. So it was nice to have a little bit of extra help there also. So we started heading back. We headed down the green, and they had some, you know, good control over it. Like I said, Sharp's team was there. You know, the chiefs were there, the fire departments. And like the chief said, you know, for a little while, it wasn't everything compiled at once. It was kind of, you know, we were up to, you know, maybe 9 or 12 or so at the time. You know, they had command set up, and it just seemed to kind of, you know, we had more than normal, but nothing that we couldn't handle. And it seemed to kind of de-escalate for a little while. We were actually leaving the scene when the jumper came in. So, you know, we went up there. We were up there for a little while, and you know, my supervisor called me and said, "Hey, you know, they're starting to kind of compile again on the green." So, you know, we cleared up from there, went back to the green, and, you know, like the chief said, it got I don't want to say a little bit taxing for a little while, because we pretty much responded to all the incidents with New Haven Fire, the building collapse, you know, they had the structural fire and everything else. We sent resources to all those with them, not only for the patients, but for their own guys. So we have resources there for them. So we had a little bit of everybody and everything. But you know, as the day went on, you know, we were prepared for it. We had our command vehicle come down. Like you said, we worked great together. They hired, you know, some overtime guys who came down on their gator, which was a big, you know, big resource for us. It was a lot easier to get around on the green to get to people. Got a lot busier as the day went on. You know, people would come up to you, "Oh, we have, you know, 3 or 4 people." That was, you know, a little more of the challenge. You know, they'd find 3 or 4 people behind the church. So you were dealing with, you know, multiple people at one time. And then, like the chief said, you know, people get discharged, they come back down, and you find them with the band still on, and you know you were dealing with, you know, same person that went in maybe, you know, 6, 7 hours ago.
Chief, was one person assigned to tracking as part of the command staff to track who was going to which hospital?
Yes, we had AMR
Yes.
tracking the
Yeah. So after we set up the command post, I became the EMS incident commander, And we had, my boss, Tim Craven, he was there, our CES manager, Mike Tercio, and we all kind of played a role. Mike started tracking who was going to what hospital, taking names as best as he could, find out who was going where. Timmy was, kind of acting as the person who was talking to the media.
Now, you mentioned they were using the gator. Were they putting the litter or the stretcher on the gator and moving them to ambulances? Or how were you?
No, we were having the ambulance come right on the green.
Okay.
But it was just a lot easier than having guys lug gear and try to get to certain parts of the green. We also have a gator, so we brought ours down later also. But just to get the patients a lot quicker. Initial patient contact. So if we had, hey, we're on the lower green and there's 3 patients overdosed way up on the other side of the green, instead of you lugging all your gear and having to run, a city block or, with all your gear, you get the patients a lot quicker. Just being able to throw all that gear on the gator and get to them. Because, you have all those people, you have people, as always, you get more and more people on the green. They're curious now, right? What's going on? So now you got people congregating on the green. Plus you have, more police presence, fire presence, EMS, more and more people on the green. Yeah, media, media trucks, everything. We got to be really, really careful who we were letting drive on the green. So, even the ambulances that were coming in to pick up the patients, we were advising them, listen, creep onto the green. Last thing we want to do is run anybody over or come to pick somebody up. So,
some really good points of things that you had to do that, because like I said, this didn't happen instantaneously. It was spread out. Things started continuously happening between the media and the other agencies. And I know Chief and John, you both mentioned the SHARP team a little bit, right? We have a resource here, and we'll let Dr. Cohn explain what the SHARP team is and what his role and what the SHARP team role actually was that day. And I also know that he has some statistics here as far as numbers of what you dealt with. But I also want to remind all the followers today, if you're watching live and you have questions for anybody here regarding this incident we're talking about, make sure you use the hashtag FETalk. We'll come up in our chat or here monitoring Twitter, and we'll answer those questions live for you. So, Doc?
So a couple things I want to build off of what Chief Andetto and John said. So there's sort of a day zero to this was August 14th. We actually had some isolated overdoses on the green in the evening, but not enough to really get anybody's attention. Nobody really kind of put this all together that maybe something was out of the ordinary. The bulk of the cases started around 9 o'clock on Wednesday, August 15th. And I mentioned the date specifically because it was ridiculously hot. It was 90 degrees each day of this event. So when John's talking about getting the crews to the patients, hauling the gear across the green, it's 90 degrees and humid. It's a typical, New Haven summer day. The weather was not our friend. Having the command bus there with the air conditioning helped a good deal later on that first day and the second day. There were a total of 49 cases on Wednesday the 15th, and then 30 more cases the next day, August 16th, which was kind of when things de-escalated a little bit. But interestingly, there was 109 ER visits, but only 52 patients total. There were a lot of repeat offenders, as everybody here has noticed. I'm told there was one person who cycled through 13 times. I don't really know if that's right or not, but there were definitely patients who went through 2, 3, 4 times. One of the interesting things about whatever this drug was, it came on very quick and knocked patients down real fast, but it also went away really quick. And we get patients in the emergency department an hour later, they were ready to go. They were awake, alert, talking, walking, looking great, and they got cut loose. And then they would come back over to the green and go back at it again. I think that's what caused the recycling here. The 2 hospitals we're talking about are both relatively close to the green. It's not too far to get back. That also helped with the ambulance resources, being able to get back in service, get back to the green after they dropped the patient off. They didn't have to travel far to get back over to the ED.
I'm going to stop there for a second. Yep. Should you think that these patients were having a relapse? Or do you think that they were going back and being re-exposed?
I think they were reusing.
Okay.
That's what I think, yeah. The police guys were telling us that there was at some point during this event, a dealer who was actually giving some stuff away, just trying to drum up future customers. So that might have been part of it. I don't know. We know that the main drugs in question were 2 of the synthetic cannabinoids. It was not fentanyl, as was popularly reported. Most of the patients actually had no fentanyl in their systems at all. And the several specimens that the PD recovered that were essentially joints that they sent up to the state lab, none of them had fentanyl in them. It was all the synthetic cannabinoids. It wasn't actually an opiate event at all. But if you kind of look at what the newspaper articles and all said, some of them mentioned that there were opium involved. That was not very much the case. Going back to the SHARP team, we have the physician response team here in New Haven. Dr. Bogutsky, Sandy Bogutsky, who's our medical director, was actually out in the field that day anyway doing a check ride with a new medic. We have all of our new paramedics go through a final check ride with one of the docs to make sure they're cleared for duty. So she was actually out anyway and responded to one of these initial calls around 9 o'clock that day, which came in as a cardiac arrest. So she fairly quickly recognized that this was not just an isolated deal, but was turning into a larger and larger cluster. I was in my office over at Yale, heard all this on the radio, texted her to see if any more help was needed. And then I came over in the response vehicle. So the two of us were probably there by, I guess I probably got there maybe around 9:30 or so. So we were there pretty much for the duration.
Chief, at the onset of this incident, you started having multiple patients. At what point did you determine that this was a overdose and it wasn't a hazardous material incident?
Well, just from the reports we were getting on the green, people were telling us what was coming in.
Okay.
So we typically
based on intel from
based on intel we were getting, what people were saying they were doing prior to, we knew right off the bat. We tend to have our normal. There's a normal response to the green for overdoses, where we would get our typical maybe 3 to 4 in a pop, where we're tending to get it. We had reports, and actually a lot of reports we were getting eventually led to the police actually catching the person that was passing this out. Some of the people that came back, that was their second time, said, "Oh, he's back over there, and I'm not touching it again." So the intel actually came from the people themselves. They did come around pretty responsive pretty quickly and would say what they did.
I believe it was the Wednesday before that. This was Wednesday. The Wednesday before that, we had 9 or 10 on the green that really nobody kind of paid attention to, because that was
9 or 10 could be the norm.
That could be the norm for us.
And a fair number of them we all recognize. We know some of these people by name. We see them a lot in the ED. We see them a lot out on the streets. And a lot of them, are pretty straight up guys. You just ask them, "Hey, what's going on?" And they'll tell you, I got some stuff from this guy, and I don't think it was what I thought it was. They were not shy about telling us what was going on. So we had pretty good intel from the patients themselves. Like Chief Vendetto said, that this was a drug event of some kind, as opposed to, some other sort of hazmat event.
Now, Lieutenant, I know you weren't involved in this incident being in Milford, Connecticut, but being a lieutenant of the fire service, I'm sure that you have some things circling in your head here, right?
Absolutely.
So I know you want to jump in out here a little bit.
My biggest question was that I'd heard reports that the Narcan actually had a positive effect on some of these people.
Yep.
So with the lack of fentanyl being present, how did that Narcan?
So there were a few patients who did test positive for fentanyl. I think it was only 4 or 5 out of the whatever it was, 52.
Okay.
So it might have just been, that those happened to be the patients. I don't know.
Gotcha.
The other thing that we were kind of thinking later when we were sort of doing the debriefings and whatnot is, given how quickly the drugs went off and how quickly people came around, it might have just been sheer coincidence. We gave them some Narcan, and a short while later they happened to come around. So I'm not totally convinced that we sort of saved people with Narcan, even though it kind of looked that way. And there's no way to know for sure.
So there wasn't a definitive treatment modality. It was kind of like observe.
It was all supportive care. Some patients we did have to, bag valve mask ventilation for a little while to kind of get them through it. But the majority of the patients, John, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the majority of the ones that I saw, by the time they got assessed, put on the stretcher, loaded in the ambulance, were all already starting to wake up. There were very few patients who were still really out of it when transport to the hospital was initiated. It came on and went off that quickly, which is probably really a good thing.
It was really quick.
Yeah.
You start seeing the impact on the whole system with this stuff also. You start seeing the impact on the neighboring communities, on the fire department. Chief, you said you had a building collapse, you had a report of a jumper that day, on top of the other normal incidents that the city of New Haven does. AMR, you do a couple hundred calls every couple hours here in the community.
I believe that day we did 397 calls.
397 calls in the city of New Haven on that day. So you see that this doesn't just have an impact of that one incident. It also has a compounding effect on the surrounding community and also the hospitals. So, Doc, once you got these patients to the hospital, you have 109 ER visits in addition to all the other. So we start looking at an overload of the hospitals also. How was that addressed, and did the EMS and fire assist you in that at all? I've been reading some reports out of Las Vegas, how during the mass shooting they had in Vegas, they deployed EMS and fire resources to the emergency room to help with that load in the ER. Did the city of New Haven, was that needed? And how did that work?
It wasn't needed because, as Chief Vendetto pointed out, the event was sort of spread out over time.
Okay.
We also roughly divided those 109 patients between the two emergency departments at Yale New Haven and the St. Raphael campus of Yale. So that helped a little bit. By sheer coincidence, one of the docs working the Yale ED was a toxicologist. So he is, sort of attuned to what's going on here. And he recognized fairly early that very few of these patients were going to be staying in the ED for a long period of time. So we knew we were going to be able to get them out relatively quickly. So both EDs did a few things to manage the load, call some extra resources down, et cetera, but never had to go into formal disaster mode, which would have happened, let's say, had these people all come in at the same time. But because it was spread out, in chunks over time, you could kind of manage the group you got, get them all squared away, and then maybe an hour later, another handful would dribble in, and it just sort of kept rolling, as we said.
Was there any attempt, once the hospital recognized that we were having repeat offenders, to try to hold them into the ER a little bit longer to try to
a little bit, yeah. But basically, the patients kind of get to the point where they're like, I'm good, I'm out of here, and you can't really hold them. So we did get a lot of information from them. The folks in the ED were gathering information on behalf of the police department. We did have police department reps, I know, at the Yale New Haven ED. I'm not sure about the St. Raphael campus. And they were interviewing the patients, gathering whatever kind of information they could about who they'd gotten the material from, which I think is what helped them actually get the guy ultimately. So they were, interviewing patients in the ED. That probably, again, sort of delayed them getting back out on the street. But given that this was really a sort of like a 2.5-day event, if you start on Tuesday evening and go through Thursday, you can't hold the patients that long. They're eventually going to get back out and go off and do whatever they do. That may involve coming back over. One other thing to mention is that we did have some patients who weren't physically on the green. It was definitely that building across from the Omni. I don't remember exactly where they were, but I remember Engine 6 going over to find a patient who was sort of behind a dumpster in a building maybe a block and a half away, almost certainly from the same event, but wasn't physically found on the green. So it wasn't, perfectly geographically confined. We had a few incidents around the periphery as well, and Engine 4, Engine 10.
Yeah, Engine 10. So in other parts of the city, 10 didn't happen to. Engine 10 had
and
3 within fear.
It responded in front of the Schubert for a couple that were obviously part of the situation.
Yeah.
Maybe just took it, walked, just off the green in front of the Schubert.
Yeah.
About as far as there and collapsed on the sidewalk.
And for a period of time at the onset, we basically had 3 engine companies, kind of one on each side of the green. And I remember 6's was over here, 8's was over here, 4's was over here, and they were kind of managing that kind of geographic part of the green. And then once more AMR resources came, we were able to kind of free some of those guys up a little bit. But they spent a good chunk of the morning there.
Good chunk of the morning they spent. And that is what we did. We divided the green up into those sections and just had those divisions. Each engine covered their area. They were treating the patient. AMR came over. They just went right to the next person. And that's how we kind of broke it down. Then we were forced, in order to handle everything that was going on in the city that day, to backfill and bring in medics and put them on the gator, and did the same thing.
So, Chief, what were the biggest challenges for the city of New Haven and the New Haven Fire Department?
Well, the first biggest challenge was it's a public green, and it's over 3 city blocks. So it's not like they're right within your view. It's not an easy area to block off or set up, get your command post. That's why when we broke the engines down, we put them into different areas. So you were covering this section of the green. Somebody was covering another section of the green. That was a tough part at first. There's a lot of traffic going through it. So trying to keep track of who's going on. We have a lot of people that tend to live on the green. So somebody may be down on the green, but they're actually resting and just staying on the green. So that was a lot of the hard parts initially off the initial handle it. The taxing part was just a sheer call volume. So you took we had at least, one time we had 4 engines on scene in both of our emergency units. So that pulled away from the city. So, and with everything else going on, we had to get them freed up quickly and then bring back in the back resources to help us.
So if you had that same incident today, what would you do different?
Well, the main thing I would probably do is not scale it back as quick as we initially thought. We had the initial 10 or 12 people. We started to break down the command posts and we pulled people back. We need to be a little bit better, I think, on patient tracking. Was the initial thing. That was our biggest thing I seen at first, and we've been addressing that even moving forward. When I look back on this and did our the briefings on it, our weakness was definitely on the initial patient tracking, how many left, who went where, was quickly off the green, because again, it came, we had 7 or 8 or 9, then we had 13, and we're like, all right, where'd they go? So we didn't have that initial, taking it from the MCI and really tracking right off the bat. So that was our biggest thing when the Sharp team got to, they had the smart triage. We were going to go into it. We already had like 13 people, I think, off the green at that time. And then to kind of load that, and then put away the smart triage. That would be the one thing I would make sure we got a quicker.
Okay, so earlier documentation.
Earlier
Using
documentation.
whatever triage system the department or the agency is using. Here we use the smart tag triage system, but
for this kind of thing, the tags never get used initially because you don't even
You didn't
recognize
expect it.
initially that this is going to be an MCI. So, you know, the first half dozen or so that are going, that's just another day on the green. You know, there's nothing really remarkable about that. So, of course, they didn't get triage tags. By the time we kind of get into that mode, we have all the resources there, and we're thinking, you know, this is not just another day on the green. Maybe we should break out the triage tags. You're already 15, 20 patients in the hole.
Exactly.
And trying to recover that information of who went where. Even when we're working at full scale, you know, you may have somebody way on the other side of the green, the ambulance pulls up over there, grabs the patient, off they go. They were never anywhere near the command post to be able to communicate about what's going on. So we did lose some data there, and some of it I think is unavoidable.
Yeah.
To be honest with you.
I got to agree with the chief. For our standpoint, and I've talked to Timmy about this also, is how quick we scaled back. And I think we've talked about this too, chief. It was just, you know, we've never had something like this, and it was just over such a long period of time. Every time you thought, okay, you got 20, and then you had that, you know, hour and a half period where maybe you had one and then you didn't have anything. It's like, all right, it's pretty much over. You know, we transported 20-something people to the hospital. It's over. We're starting to scale back. We're releasing people and everything else. And then, bang, you got hit with 15 more, like, within 20 minutes. You know, I know that the very first night we really started to scale back. And I think I was, you know, by myself on the green as like the last supervisor there. And we had a couple of ambulances and we were really scaling back. And I had somebody come up to me and said, oh, there's 3 people up on the green, unresponsive. So I went up there and, you know, I'm treating 3 unresponsive patients by myself. And if it wasn't for the 2 guys from the fire department, we each took one and they were all literally not breathing. Or one was not breathing, the other 2 were unresponsive. But, you know, and I was like, okay, that's it. That's the one thing I learned. We can't scale back so quick.
You got to scale back eventually. I mean,
you know,
right,
eventually,
it's hard to know. You know,
it's
that's
just
the
hard to know
It's hard
because
to know
then
when it's time.
you know how many people do you leave there all night?
Right.
You know,
There's a financial cost to it.
You know, exactly. And then, you know, in the morning, it just, like you said, Thursday morning, it just picked right back up again. And then we're there all day, all night, Thursday again. So, you know, at what point do you finally scale back? Thursday night, do you go?
We said it wasn't that one incident like that crash,
You know,
or reflexing with a school bus.
and then-
Right.
Where
They cleaned
you
up and it was
see
done.
everything that's coming your way.
And then
you
actually-
triage them and then you move on.
And then actually Friday morning, because obviously we're all paying attention to it. Friday morning, we had 4 or 5 more because I was paying attention to it. And I said, you know, I was like, here we go again. I'm like, are we going to do this for is this day 3? And we only had 4 or 5, which were probably just regular
The
norm. And then that was it for the course of the day. Because I'm like, and I don't know if I could do this another day.
We did have a bunch of extra resources the second day. New Haven Fire, you had Lieutenant McGovern was down there with one of the paramedics in a spare vehicle, just dedicated to the area, helping to sort out who needs to do what, and that freed up your regular ALS
Got our
units.
engines back.
Yeah,
And
and
your
I
engines
left
to be back
one
on the road.
ambulance down
That's
there
helpful.
dedicated to the green. While we're talking about the big thing I want to bring up that was taxing to us was, like Dr. Cohn said, although only maybe a couple of them were responding to the Narcan, we use Narcan on almost everybody. So that was taxing to us because we went through hundreds of boxes of Narcan. So now we depleted like our whole stock, everything we had. So, you know, I spent half of my time, you know, on the phone calling Hartford, Bridgeport. You know, we went as far as we called the pharmacy at L&M, and we bought, out in New London, L&M Hospital, because we have a car station out there. And I said, listen, you guys got any you can spare for us? And they're like, oh, we can give you 40 boxes. But it, you know, they sent the car over there. We grabbed it and we brought it. Our supplier, one of our suppliers, was like, we can overnight ship you some. You know, I mean, we're just, you know, we're going crazy just getting Narcan wherever we can. So that was a taxing part to us because we were just using so much Narcan.
Chief, something that Chief Alston and yourself did that I thought was interesting was because it went over such a long time span and while our members were interacting with AMR, with the individuals overdosing, at the beginning, they didn't know what the outcome of that person's life was going to be. The chief rotated companies in and out from outside the city limits, right?
Yes. So we didn't want to
Keep our
overtax.
people fresh.
Engine 4, Engine 6, Engine 8 were getting hit with so many calls, and we're just so overwhelmed that we actually had to take them back. We took them off duty, and we actually brought companies in from the outer areas of the department and brought them into the city to handle some of the calls.
So for our viewers, that's real important, especially when you have something for a long period of time. The fire service tends to be who's ever first due, you're staying there forever until we just beat you up. And Chief Austin and Chief Vendetto realized, well, wait a second, maybe they don't need to stay here for the entire event. Rotate another company in, it gives experience to other companies, but it also
Gives the guy
takes
the
care
break.
of our personnel.
Oh
and
yeah,
is
you
that
got to give them a
needed
break. I mean, you could even see. I mean, like I said, we didn't have anybody there at first. 6s, 4s. You could see them guys on the green with their gear running from one end of the green to the other.
In the
You
90
gotta-
degree heat.
Yeah, in
the
the
weather was not
90-degree
helping
heat.
us.
And I mean, you can even see them just on the news footage. They're running from one end of the green to the other with their.
And
with all
normally
their
in
gear,
fire
'cause you got
service,
them on
we
the
think
front.
of rehab, but this was another piece. You almost had that mental rehab that the companies needed to make sure that they were getting taken care of, not just physically, but also
Yeah.
psychologically.
Well, like Dr. Cohn said, that was one advantage of later on when we finally said we might be here a while, bringing our command bus down, which is set up with air conditioning and dispatch capabilities and everything else. Just to get people, whoever and anybody, we were telling fire department, police department, whoever, go inside, cool down. Because it was just brutal. It was very humid, hot.
Now, before we go right to Chief Halton, I tweeted out a picture of the green. So normally for our viewers, it's important when you have a mass casualty incident to ensure that you establish that transportation corridor for ambulances to get in and out early on before the police department comes and blocks up all your streets with the news. We've seen that in North Haven. We've seen that in other incidents. But the green is kind of
So big, it
surrounded
wasn't.
by streets. It has a major city street that
Right
cuts
down
through
the
the center of it, and it also has trap rock, stone dust roads that go on the side. So the transportation corridor didn't appear to be an incident,
Yeah, it was
that
not
an
factor.
issue.
but it's
Yeah.
something for everybody else
Yeah.
listening out there.
It was
It's
more
very
media trucks in
rare
a way than there was
to
anything
get
else.
an incident where it's going to be surrounded by roads. It's big
Yeah.
city roads. So something to think about. Chief Halton, would you like to weigh in on this? And thank you very much. It's an honor to have the editor-in-chief, the chief of all chiefs, to come on and visit our Google Hangout today. We appreciate it.
Okay, I don't know where to begin. That's so wrong, Frank, but I'm just an ombudsman. But, a few things off the top of the list here. First, what a remarkable collection and what an incredible representation of really the state of American emergency response nationwide. We have AMR, law enforcement, fire, the dock. I mean, if you talk about a community, there's a community, and kudos to you all. I think it's an incredible model going forward for how we have to have these conversations, especially in regards to the opioid crisis. As I understand, this is not an opioid related event, Doc, and I don't mean to continue to confound this. That was one of my second points I'll get to in a moment. But kudos to the community and all of you. We often talk about leadership, and we often talk about the old joke: you could have a state trooper, a cop, a firefighter, and an EMS guy at a scene, and everything's great until the first supervisor shows up. Then everything goes right down the toilet. But clearly that's not the case in New Haven, and clearly it's not the case. It's the old joke like 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. That's not true either. I mean, this is truly what is going on. I think much to the consternation of the politicians who'd like to paint us with a much more dysfunctional brush, right? And other so-called pundits. Truly, this is a great representation of of excellence in action in what will really be an archetypal American city. I mean, does it get any more American than Harvard Yard and and the Boston Commons and all of that, what you all have to do with on a regular basis in New Haven and your associated cities in that area? I mean, it's the birthplace of American culture, and and even being a New Yorker, I'll acquiesce that point. Only that so slightly, but so my kudos there to begin with. And I think that there's lessons to be learned in just how you've managed to create this non-divisional culture where it seems as if everyone went and excuse me for using the M word, but according to merit and capability in their roles, right? It wasn't you know, I'm this or I'm entitled to that, or because I have more ambulances or I have more fire trucks or I have more, or I have guns, which guns generally win. I generally acquiesce to the guy with the guns. So, you know, I'll just throw that out there. But that was a great lesson learned in the takeaway. What's really puzzling, Doc, and this question I guess would go to you, is, man, what the heck was it? And okay, so, and it's just a curiosity, right? As an ombudsman, and as I'm listening to your conversation, and you know, it's really confounding. The Narcan worked, and we heard that, albeit maybe temporarily, and you know, and now with the proliferation of Narcan being handed out, you know, people buy it like breath mints now. I was at the airport the other day, and a lady got some certs and some Narcan. I thought it was kind of interesting. I'm just kidding, but you know what I mean? It's really kind of gotten to that point, and that's an interesting message in the process too. What are we sending, right? I mean, you know, it's kind of an interesting. I mean, there's a moral hazard there, I think, that we have to be careful about, but that's for another group. But Doc, do we have any idea? And you said most people were getting it through marijuana, through smoking marijuana, and so is it something to do with maybe the how that marijuana was grown, or a product they may have used, or?
It was all synthetic. It's the synthetic cannabinoids like K2, probably coming from China. There were at least 2 different varieties in the samples that the police collected and sent to the state lab, and there were at least 2 different ones in the specimens we got from the patients, the urine and blood specimens that we got from the patients. So it was mostly synthetic marijuanas, or synthetic cannabinoids is the more correct term. So certainly related to marijuana, but not your typical, you know, guy growing it in his backyard or in his upstairs apartment. It's all synthetic. Most of it's coming in from overseas. And none of the specimens were pure. They all had other stuff mixed in with them. You know, you never really know what you're getting when you're buying this stuff. And several of the patients told us that they thought they were buying crack cocaine and ended up with this stuff instead. We've had a number of actual opiate overdoses in the New Haven area, including as recently as the last couple of weeks, of patients who swore to us that they were trying to buy crack and ended up with something like a fentanyl or one of those fentanyl analogs and really did need the Narcan. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. You know, I don't think you can take your dealer's word for it or what you're getting. I think that's kind of the bottom line. But it was basically synthetic cannabinoids was the main culprit in this event.
It's like trusted Michael Cohen.
That's right. If you can't trust your dealer,
trust your
I was
local
just
dealer.
watching it before the Google Hangout, so.
who are you going to trust?
Who could not have seen that coming? We knew he had to get a Michael Cohen reference in there somehow, right? So this would, I guess, go to our law enforcement compatriot. So it's fascinating. I understand that we can buy a lot of that kind of product through the mail. And as I understand from my DEA friends and law enforcement friends, that catching that stuff as it comes from China and other places is very, very difficult, right, Doc? Because the mail is not as scrutinized as the borders and the ports of entry, if you will. And this synthetic stuff, because it's synthetic, doesn't register on our detection stuff, and certainly not with our animals, the way that real pot would. And you know, not to glorify real pot, but you know, here's a guy who doesn't even drink. I'm like baffled by this stuff. But so that's a really interesting concern. And then second to that is, you know, if excuse my ignorance, and I apologize as an older person, as I understand it, people can buy this synthetic stuff legally, correct? Or is it all illegal?
That's an interesting question. It's not regulated because we don't even really know what's out there. So there's no list of illegal substances that has this stuff on it, because half the time we don't even know what it is. So it's not like, you know, all the opiates that are listed on a DEA schedule somewhere or something like that. So technically it's not illegal because there's no list somewhere of illegal stuff that has it on it, but it's similar enough to the marijuana that you should probably categorize it in that same category. But and you need so little of it. That's what makes shipping it so easy. You can ship a fairly small container by mail and you've got hundreds and hundreds of doses in there because the amount needed is so small. That's another thing that makes it really easy for the distributors and dealers to move this stuff around.
So I guess my question is, and it's kind of interesting to me, this happened in a very well-trafficked place. You know, this was a place that's very well known by you all anyway in the system. What if this was in a, you know, like Burning Man or a more remote location? Well, Doc, what was your opinion on the survivability of those folks if, say, they were, you know, say they had gone to a remote location, done the same activity? Would we have lost all these people?
I don't think we would have lost all of them, but I think we would have lost some of them. There were certainly some. The first guy that I saw, I was bagging myself for, I don't know, maybe 5-7 minutes or so while waiting for an ambulance to come over with additional equipment. But again, by the time we had him loaded in the ambulance, he had woken up and was looking around asking me what had happened. This was a guy that I was ventilating with a bag valve mask, you know, 5 minutes earlier. There were a couple of patients who ended up on ventilators in the emergency department. One patient did end up in the ICU for a day or two. So I think if you took these same, you know, 52 patients without medical support, I'll take a guess and say you might have lost 10 or 15 of them, and the others probably would have resolved spontaneously. But yeah, some of them, some of the ones that John was taking care of, probably would not have survived without medical support had this been going on in some remote location, or even just, you know, somebody alone in their apartment. It doesn't even have to be out, you know, out of Burning Man or out in the rural area. It just be somebody, you know, using this stuff by themselves in their apartment somewhere. Doesn't realize what it is that they have, don't get any medical support when they go down, and, you know, somebody finds them dead the next day. Go big.
So I guess my concern then is for folks like us, and obviously, you know, John with AMR and our law enforcement brothers and sisters. There's a multitude of these events these days. I mean, there's one every weekend somewhere. You know, a rock fest, a country music fest, or whatever. And this kind of product is going to be used. How much personnel overall do you estimate were involved? If you had to give a head count, what was the personnel number that were involved in this in total?
Between us and the fire department?
Us, fire, law enforcement, you know, hospital, just a gross number. What would you think?
A couple hundred.
So if you put it over the shifts work over the 3 days, you know, that's starting that Tuesday evening and then going all day Wednesday and a good chunk of Thursday. It's got to be 150, 200.
Yeah.
But clearly you've got a really sophisticated, dense population there. And my concern is the Minot, North Dakotas of the world, and and the isolated Oklahomas of the world, and places like that where they don't have 300 people, they don't have 200 people, and this experience that you had is so terrifying, because drug use, as you know, in the Southwest and the Midwest, and certainly is so out of control. Not to diminish anything about the opioid crisis on the Eastern Seaboard there, which is just horrible. It's absolutely horrible. But I'm fearful for how we amass the kind of resources that you had in these other communities, and what we can do to try to front end load some of that based upon your experience. In other words, if I'm at, you know, rural Oklahoma, here where I live, by the way, I'm not throwing Oklahomans under the bus randomly. I'm part of that culture. So if we had one of those events in one of our more isolated areas, I should probably have prearranged agreements with folks like AMR, EMSA's big out here, or Acadia, or Falk, or whoever's a major transporter in the region, as well as my mutual aid with my multiple fire departments, and obviously my standing agreements with my law enforcement folks. That where I think we're weakest stock, to be honest with you, is our inter-hospital stuff, right? I think it's the street urchins, as we are, you know, we're all pretty used to the other colors out there. We're like biker gangs. We kind of respect each other's territory, you know. Or the fire department's obviously the Hell Angels. I'm just kidding, but I mean, we kind of know the other folks. You all are kind of more interesting to us, and obviously having a medical director like yourself inside the system, we all have our medical directors, but some of our more rural communities, the medical director is a county medical director, if you will, and he might be in a major metropolitan area, but some of his reach could be 300-400 miles in some communities, Montana, New Mexico, Texas, and such. So I think the problem is is terrifying in that regard, in terms of a major medical emergency with basically a substance that's still basically unknown, but was readily available and was potentially fatal. So
also got transport distance issues. Like I mentioned, we were fortunate because this happened, maybe a mile and a half from one ED and half a mile from the other. You have the event in the rural areas you're talking about. You decide this patient really does need to be transported. Now you've taken that ambulance out of service for 2 hours. They're an hour getting to the hospital, an hour coming back, and you only had a handful to begin with. The numbers of ambulances we have in our area and the proximity of the hospitals really helped us. You mentioned mutual aid agreements. We could easily have brought in additional ambulances from the surrounding towns had AMR been overtaxed. We have those agreements in place as well, getting some ambulances in from the surrounding areas if needed. But as soon as you get to the rural areas, even those become few and far between. Maybe your nearest mutual aid partner is 40 miles away and can send you one BLS ambulance if you give them half an hour to find a crew. That's going to be a whole different ballgame.
One of the things that I think is important, especially for medical directors, is you shouldn't be meeting them for the first time at an emergency incident. And I got to give a lot of credit to the Sharps team, especially under the leadership of Dr. Cohn. There's nobody in Connecticut that doesn't know about the Sharps team, know that that's a resource, and know who Dr. David Cohn is from Yale, because it's not just about emergencies. They're out in the first responder community all the time. And that's really a credit to the system that we have here at Yale New Haven.
Part of the benefit of the Sharp team, Frank, is they're not just medical directors. A lot of them have gone through Firefighter 1 training. They've gone through NIMS. They work with us on a daily basis out in the street. I still work part-time as a paramedic in the city of New Haven, and it's not uncommon on a Thursday night to have a Sharp team doctor just show up at a routine medical call to work with the fire department, work with the brothers and sisters on the engine companies, the brothers and sisters on the emergency unit, as well as with the AMR staff. So we work on a daily basis with each other. And the other benefit is, regional airport, or Tweed Regional Airport, I mentioned in the beginning, every year we get the tabletop exercise. We're like, here we go again. And every 3 years we got the full-scale triannual drill with 40 to 50 patients that we triage, treat, transport to the hospitals. And I know I felt that over the years, you just kind of go through the motions because it's getting, every 3 years, you're kind of used to it, just going through the motions again. But then you take an incident like this and it highlights how every 3 years of doing those full-scale exercises and every year of doing these tabletop drills really pay off. Well, it wasn't on the airport property, thank goodness. It wasn't an airplane crash, thank goodness. But it's paid off on the relationships that we build with all of our stakeholders and each other services to take care of an incident like this. And it really pays off having these relationships built ahead of time.
And for our viewers, when the Sharp team, I could kind of compare it to DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, when they show up on a scene, they're not taking over your hazmat. They're not taking over your medical call. They're reporting to the command post as a resource. And if you don't think you're going to need them, wait a couple minutes and then you'll look and you say, hey, doc, I got a quick question for you. So it's important that you realize that they're not there to take over your incident. They're there to make your incident go safer, more efficient, and more effective. And I think that's a credit to the fire department. Chief, can you comment on that? Because you're in command of a lot of these big incidents, and here you're looking towards the Sharp team.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when they come on scene, they're an asset to you. They don't overstep the bounds. They understand the ICS roles. They came on scene. They were a huge asset helping us getting information. We just worked with Dr. Cohn the other day with the Sharp team. We had a electrical line down on a public transportation bus. A high voltage line came down on it, and the Sharp team came out. So we're always interacting in those roles. To have them on scene for that expertise is unbelievable, because we were dealing with a drug that we didn't know. So kind of like a hazmat, a drug we didn't know, dealing with it. So you had the doctors on scene, you had their expertise, getting that information from them, what resources we were going to need, what the hospitals can handle. So as incident commanders, you could make an informed decision. It's important to have as many input as you can on scene to make that correct decision.
Doc, is it are these teams? So, as a member of the Street Medicine Society, which I'm sure you are, there's a lot of docs like you that came up through the system. And the interesting thing about all the street medicine docs, that they actually have a group called the Street Medicine Society, and these guys are all, well, they were cats like us at one time, but they actually had enough brains to become doctors, so they went through the system. And what's fascinating are these teams now. I guess the question is the movement growing? Are we seeing these teams becoming more of a movement, or is this the very beginning here that we're seeing here in New Haven?
No, we're past the very beginning, but I wouldn't say they're widespread yet. We're the only one in Connecticut, but there's a bunch in our nearby New England states. There's a couple down in New Jersey, several throughout New York State. So it's a concept that's building, and it's usually centered around academic centers where you've got enough docs that are specializing in EMS. You can have enough resources to put a team together. So you've got a fair number of these in the Midwest, a bunch on the West Coast. It's a growing trend, but I wouldn't say it's yet widespread.
Well, we'd love to hear you talk more. Just a shameless plug. We'd love to hear you talk more about it on either the Journal of Emergency Medical Services, and if you'd love to have you come down to Tampa for EMS 2020. That's where we'll be. EMS Today 2020 will be down in Tampa next year. I think it's something that we need to move forward, nationwide. And I like the fact that you can kind of have some of that local conformity, right? It's not like it's you have to do this, in every town. It's do what works and where you are. I like those locally grown, kind of organic, to use the modern day word, events. So and systems. But that's a fantastic asset for all of you folks, and we'd love to have you talk more about it, Doc. Just as a shameless plug before Frank starts wrapping things up, and I don't get a chance to make a shameless plug. And this event clearly, for FDIC, I don't think we have this for 2019. Obviously, it happened after the close, but this would make a great event to talk about at FDIC, because the drug problem is not going to get better. I mean, we can go all the way back to Woodstock with, hey, there's some bad acid going around, so make sure the guy giving you acid, right? Good luck with that, right? So. But here we are today, and so it's not a new phenomenon. It's probably the drug. And my mom, God rest her soul, 95 years ago, knew about marijuana in New York City, right? They were blowing weed in New York City in the 1920s, and so they didn't think much of it till the government decided to make it illegal. And then they arrested Gene Krupa, and everybody knows that story. So, but now we're kind of seeing a really interesting phase where the synthetic stuff and all this other stuff, and even marijuana itself, there's a lot of discussion going on there. And I think it's an important discussion to have. There's some scholarly papers out now about the psychological effects and violence and other issues like that. So it's not as benign a substance as it's been painted to be for a long time. And I don't know whether that stuff's true or not true, but I'm always the skeptic, and I'm always uncertain, which I find to be much better than certain. I was certain that the Rams were going to win. How'd that work out for me? Never bet against you guys. Nobody ever got rich betting against Tom Brady. So I'm going to bet that this is going to happen again. And I hate to say that, but it's going to happen again. And we need to share this message more broadly. And I think the takeaways that all of you had, I hope you all can collaborate. Bring John in. Obviously, Chief Austin should bring John in and collaborate on this for us. And I wanted to thank you all, but I also want to challenge you to say that the Sharps program and the interagency system that you've created and the collaboration is critically important. And I was hoping that I have a fellow here who you may know. I pulled out some cards because I knew you were going to be on today. Michael Rangone. John, do you know him from AMR?
Name sounds familiar.
So Mike is he's AMR's Office of Emergency Management. He's the Chief of Emergency Management and Preparedness for AMR. Pardon?
He owes me money. No.
He owes you money. Me too. Very nice man. But I think he and Lori and Dr. Rausch would be very supportive of having you, continue to tell people about this story and how well, AMR obviously performed and what you're doing with this group. And I would also. So to all of you, we kind of just hit the top of the mark on this story, but there's a lot of stories inside this story. and I wish we had more time, but we don't. And I'll throw it back to Frank and PJ to wrap it up. But this is a scary story. This is a really scary story. I'm not naive enough to think that we can just say no. Unfortunately, I'm a Catholic, and we use the rhythm method, and you know what that means. You end up getting called daddy. So it's the same thing with the Just Say No program. It sounds good, but it's not how it works. And I think we need to be more than prepared for these events, because if we're not, if we're underprepared, there's no excuse for it after hearing this story. There's just no excuse for it. So thank you. And what an event. What an amazing event.
So it looks like you got a potential class for next year at FDIC. And Bobby, can you elaborate on our 2 medical conferences? Because you just are wrapping one up in the National Harbor, correct?
Yeah, we just wrapped up National Harbor, close to 5,000 folks. We met for a week. It's called EMS Today. It'll be in Tampa next year, and then back to National Harbor in 2021. But for 2020, we're in Tampa. Doc, we'd love to have you come down and tell the medical side of it. John, tell the ambulance side of it and fire side of it together, and the response side of it, law enforcement, and all of it. And then I think there's an administrative side of this that's even more daunting for folks. And EMS Today covers everything from basic first aid to hospital administration and billing and cost recovery and ambulance administration and it's like FDIC with a focus on medical services, emergency medical services. So really neat event. And we have pre-conference workshops. There's hands-on. There's the GEMS games. And when you think about it, this is almost like a GEMS game scenario, right? The GEMS games is a highly evolved competition where they come up with a wickedly complex problem and they challenge the first arriving crews to try to wrap their heads around it, if you will, as your first arriving crews had to do on this particular event. So and FDIC is incorporating more and more emergency medical services just because it's my grandfather, God rest his soul, great-grandfather, great-grandfather, God rest his soul, who fought fire in the 1800s, once said that the only reason for a man to go in a burning building was to save another man. Duh. But because they had no mass, right? But it's Croker's statement, right? Our highest efforts are when we save human life. And it doesn't matter whether it's doing CPR or administering Narcan or pulling them out of a burning building. You got to prepare for it, you got to drill for it, and you got to be ready. So we'd love to have you present. FDIC is only 5 weeks away, and topics like this will be coming up, and we'd love to see this for 2020. Fantastic topic. So thank you. Yeah, thank you, Frank, and really appreciate everybody being here today. And I don't think there's any easy answers here, clearly.
Well, I think that's it for our show today. I want to really thank Bobby Halton for coming on, Chief Mark Vendetto of the New Haven Fire Department, our Chief of Operations. We had Adam here who's going to talk about HVAC emergencies, but we're going to have him on the next show because this kind of took on a life of its own, which is exactly the purpose of a Google Hangout. John from AMR, and of course, Dr. Cohn and PJ Norwood. So we thank all our viewers today. Send any of your questions on hashtag FE Talk. We'll be sure to answer them. And hopefully out of this group of great individuals, we'll have an article coming out for fire engineering soon on all the different aspects of this alarm. And that's it for today's Google Hangout. We have PJ Norwood and myself. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
See you in 5 weeks.
See you then, Chief.